Hello again. I hope you had a bit of a break. We're continuing the conference today with the second panel. This panel will look at action research on SRHR, particularly on how activists can lead action research and help in framing questions that will help the youth in conducting relevant feminist research. With us first will be Zakaria Qorras, the first panelist. Zakaria co-founded Qorras, a group producing queer feminist knowledge, where he leads on finance and fundraising and is in various initiatives. Since 2017, Zakaria co-leads the Tajassud work in Qorras, which focuses on trans leadership, practical information, and networking for trans individuals in Lebanon. Zakaria, I give the floor to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, and بعتقد مساء الخير مساء الخير على الجميع. Okay, Aoshi, thank you for the opportunity and the space. We really enjoyed the plenary before and listening to everyone. I felt like my example that I'm giving even fits more into the conversation. I'm going to speak first a little bit about Qorras and our methodology of work in general, which led us eventually to engaging or working on the so-called action research, or research basically to do any action. What is Qorras? Qorras is a group that started formulating in 2015. The point was to synergize and bring all the expertise that the founding team has had to work on producing feminist and queer knowledges in Lebanon. Our main focus, and it remains to be, is what kind of methodologies of work that we're creating that actually involves the community that it's speaking of and speaking to, centers it in the community, of course, that it's speaking about, and has sort of a leadership in the work that it's happening and the methodology that it's happening, that it's implementing. So throughout the years, whether we were producing a podcast, whether we were producing a research or a comics or whatever it is, the methodology always had to have multiple factors. One of them is specifically building on what is already existing within the group and the peers around it, because we also, part of the work that we wanted to do is to connect to queer and trans peers around us that we historically have worked with, and we would like to work with again or build on our expertise and experience. So when in 2019, when we started interacting as with more trans individuals in Lebanon and trans peers and friends, and we started hearing more and more about the violations, not within not within the Lebanese scene, but violations that were happening within the service provision in the NGO settings towards trans individuals. It brought up a big question for us. How do we turn so-called complaints into an action? How do we turn our frustrations into something that we can build on? So I think from there, we started building on any opportunity we get, whether we started thinking what kind of questions do we have to raise to organizations, what kind of questions do we have to raise to our own community, and start building from there. One of the biggest assets we had to be able to build on this work is access to people who do research already. That can help us to frame the questions, that can help us framing the questions to honestly to get the answers we're looking for. And from there, we had the opportunity to work more on these questions and their directions with other peers of ours to ensure that they are inclusive of all the questions we all might have and not just few individuals. It was important for us when framing the questions and starting the mapping we ended up doing is that we don't frame it as a confrontation with the NGOs or the organizations that we were gonna interview. Because sometimes when the community comes to face the people that work for its own benefits, it can create a lot of tensions because people think that this is just to confront them and hold them accountable. And that accountability is not to build on the mistakes that happen to produce better quality work. So it was very important when we were framing that mapping to ensure that it's not framed as a confrontation, more as a collaboration. It's that the questions are there to help these organizations to tell us the reality of working with trans individuals as it is and not feel that they need to be defensive. Because while usually there's a power dynamic between the researcher and the subject of research, there was also a power dynamic that we felt was being created between us as a community going to those organizations, because usually community is framed as the people who have the answers, the people who have the power. So it was very important to build it in a collaborative way and a way that invites those organizations to actually work with us on pushing the work that we wanted to do. And another thing that was very important is that people understood that these questions are not here to just draw the picture of what's going on. They're not just to explain what's going on, but they were actually there because we knew what was going on. We were not actually looking for answers. We were looking for something to put on paper to be able to push for recommendations. We knew what the reality was. It was just a matter of figuring out what's important to go on a paper to be able to push for recommendation and to be able to push for action, to be able to push for work to happen, and not just to produce work that draws a picture of that reality. And it was very important also to take into consideration that when it comes to researching anything related to trans issues, to step away from the research questions that kind of are targeted on explaining further what trans is. We felt like we are in a position where we can move past that big mystery of what trans is and what trans needs are, and be able to more focus on what is currently happening on the ground and what needs to change in these things that are happening on the ground. So for example, if there's a lot of services that are targeting trans individuals in Lebanon, what are these services and what is the actual implication of all these organizations reaching out to this marginalized community overall, to look at how these organizations actually view the community, how they view their interactions with the community, to be able to gather their perception and our perception to also push for that action to happen. Okay, suddenly I feel very nervous, so I just want to make sure. Yeah, I'm gonna stop here, Lan. I think the questions that Jen has prepared, I don't know, will hopefully lead me to speaking more. And now I regret not having a PowerPoint presentation. I think that should have been the right direction.
What is Zakaria? Instead of Jen, I'll be asking some questions.
Yes,
they are sick, so they apologize for not being able to be available us in the panel. Let me see.
If Cecile wants to go ahead, and then I think we can go into more. Sorry, Cecile.
I'd like us to move to the second presentation, then we'll take Q&A. Okay, so we'll move to Cecile. Cecile Khoury holds a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology with a minor in Women and Gender Studies from the American University of Beirut. She currently works at Marsa Sexual Health Center as a project officer and researcher. Through her work, she leads on expanding Marsa's services and activities to Tripoli. Her past and current work is centered around SRHR, protection casework, programming, and research. Cecile's research and publications focus mainly on the intersection of public health, psychology, notably social, gender, and sexuality, and policy. This translated into her completing a 2-year fellowship on social science research in the Arab region with the Arab Council of Social Sciences. Cecile, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I didn't prepare a presentation as well, but I went full nerd mode on the research part. Sorry, Zakaria. So when I first was asked to talk on this panel, I thought of sharing my experience as a researcher in Marsa, but also as a researcher and my work before Marsa, notably the Yalla Care, my work with Yalla Care Coalition. I wanted first to sort of frame the discussion that I'm gonna be doing today and with a bit of background knowledge about research. So I want to first just start about explaining a bit what is feminist research and where did it come from. So feminist research, I'm going to start with where it came from. It came from a place where researchers or feminist researchers and academics were no longer sort of satisfied with the quality of research that was being produced. There was a huge gender and sexuality gap in the topic that were studies. There was a lot of unethical considerations in the way data was collected and analyzed. There was a sort of a generalization that, you know, the data being produced is representative of everyone, while the sampling was pretty exclusive to white, middle-aged, cis hetero men. And we will see the implications of that later on SRHR in particular and services in particular. So yeah, feminist research came into play to sort of challenge these views of empiricism to something that's more what could be called postmodern ways of research that focused less on quantitative research that, you know, sort of serves to put things in boxes and ease the work and is creating guidelines, quote unquote, that, you know, everyone can use within their line of work, whether it's developmental or whether it's humanitarian or medical, regardless. So it came out of a place where it's no longer enough for us to understand or to sort of quantify people's problems, quote unquote, or disorders or issues. We needed to go beyond that and sort of understand not lived experiences, but praxis in itself, the implications of people's lives and how policies and how, you know, medical procedures or whatever influence these people's lives in the way they do things. So there are a few commonly agreed upon characteristics for research methodology that uses a feminist scope, which is first considering the hierarchical power relationship between genders, and that tends to disadvantage certain genders, most notably women or trans individuals, non-binary, in the research process itself, but also it involves recognizing two types of gender equalities, one within the research itself, but also in the everyday lives. The second pillar would be the integration of diversity, including different races, ethnicities, classes, sexuality, ages, disability, and how these things affect gender relations, with a special attention to marginalized voices or voices that would usually not be included in these research, whether in sampling or in data analysis, because sometimes, you know, we would take these indicators into consideration, but they would not even be considered for analysis, or it would be something very shallow that, you know, might tell you that, yeah, I mean, queer individuals are more likely to be unemployed. But then there is no deeper understanding to the implication of this unemployment on their everyday lives. So it creates a very vacuum understanding of people. It's sort of like studying like an animal in a zoo, right? Like, this is what they eat, this is how they, and it's not comprehensive. It doesn't really show the experiences. One pillar that I personally enjoy the most is adapting the scales and the methods to measure these hard to measure aspects, such as, let's say, gender-based violence. It was something that was not quantified or measured, or, you know, it was very subjective, it was very personal, it was very taboo, and now it was coming to the surface through feminist research. One technique of research that's quite, you know, that really goes to understand all of these differences is participatory research or action research, which rose during an era of reflection and self-questioning within social research. So here it redefines the power relationship between the researcher and the researched. So it sort of creates an equal ground between both of them, rather than, you know, one person being studying another in a very objective, but we're going to revisit this objectivity. So it's value driven and self-consciously not value neutral. And it integrates subjectivity into scientific analysis and the work of structural and social transformation. So in other words, it really goes into the qualitative method and tries to understand more than, you know, data, but rather emotions and the feelings of the people that we are dealing with. And at the same time, because when we talk about objectivity and empiricism, it's quite subjective within itself. So the objectivity in empirical research is really based on the subjective understanding of the researcher. So there is no true objectivity or true meaning. So this kind of research methods were kind of here to dismantle all of these concepts of objectivity. And so it distorted this dichotomization of objective versus subjective and brought more of an interconnected understanding of these two concepts. Okay, I'm not gonna go too in deep details into the methodology, but actually, no, one second. Okay, so one important point about feminist research is using praxis as a dialectical process of collective reflection and action, rather than dividing theory and action as two different pillars. And so it sort of created a biofeedback system between the reflections and the actions themselves. So some of the bases of feminist research is inclusion, participation, action, social change, and research reflexivity, which brings the role of semi-structured and unstructured interviews as a mean of equating power dynamic as a basis to this, to moving forward with this type of research, rather than commodifying the researched. So you might kind of think, okay, what's the point between SRHR and these research methods? And in fact, there's something that Angela Davis said that's very important, which is everything is a feminist issue. And in fact, feminist theory is about questioning existing structures and if they are creating barriers to anyone, which really applies to the SRHR field in itself, because we do have barriers and the feminist interest is in reducing these barriers. So as long as we believe in eliminating oppression, it's this theory, this feminist theory and way of work falls within the SRHR field. So here I would like to move a bit to feminist research and community research. Where does it fall? So it is in the heart of community research, specifically on SRHR. It's one of the aims of community research is to give back to the community and to change realities rather than observing and theorizing. And that's exactly where, you know, the feminist theory falls in. It aims to not only, you know, study aimlessly certain people, but rather include them in the study itself and understand what are their needs in order to generate data that would help later on lobby, that would help advocate, or that would help increase support in places where support is needed. So here I can talk a bit about examples of quantitative or qualitative research that we've done in the region. I'm using this method in particular. Just a second. So I would like to talk a bit about the Yalla Care report, which was done with the Yalla Care Coalition, which was a coalition of 8 organizations that work with the queer community in Lebanon. And this report or this research came out of a humanitarian crisis, if we want to call it. So it was during 2019, after the COVID pandemic, the Beirut explosion. These organizations were receiving more calls, more people showing up to their centers, telling them that there's a certain gap here or there, or this is where we need the support, or this is how our lives are changing on the daily. And there was a certain monitoring for this, this dynamic model that was happening. And the research was based on these field observations. So the assessment of the assessment that was done during that period was based on the needs that the community members were voicing out that they are in need of at that time. And so we created it with the aim of later on giving back to this community in areas where they needed it the most, which later on showed to be food and I remember being like hygiene products being one of the things that were needed because of the COVID pandemic. So this also, you know, this is similar also to the way that Zakaria was talking and the way that Qorras do research. In fact, we worked on a booklet together where after finishing this, and I don't know if Zakaria, you would like to intervene at a certain point, please go ahead. Where after creating a baseline booklet of transitioning in Lebanon, they did community consultations in order to understand better what the community wants to do with this research and how they want it to move forward. And these are like all ideals that we like to use in our everyday work. And finally, I'm going to talk a bit about the work we do with Marsa and research in Marsa. Usually our research aims to complement advocacy towards equitable access to SRHR. And it is community-based research where we identify trends through services and through consulting partners such as Qorras, consulting organizations, individuals, through identifying gaps in literature and developing the research question and methodology accordingly, but also involving the community members into this active process. We also collect the information in a way that preserves confidentiality and anonymity due to the sensitivity of the material at hand. And we usually use it to lobby and demand for more inclusive services. So for example, in 2019, we had a manuscript on sexual health of MSM, or men who have sex with men. And we identified the importance of providing PrEP as part of a comprehensive HIV prevention package. And this manuscript fed into the NAP program, which later on started, providing PrEP and we were able to then really just provide a more comprehensive package of care. So these type of research pushed these interventions, and it could be used as a tool in the hands of activists, of other organizations. It could be used to lobby for more funds, for policy change on a national and an international level. Our second use of research in Marsa is not only, to lobby, but also to reflect internally. Because with service provision, it's important to also adopt the same process that we adopt in research, which is not assume what people need rather than understand what people need. And so we use these all of this data and these extensive conversations in order for us to fill the gaps in our services and to address the needs of the communities. I'm going to leave it here and we can pick up whatever you want.
Thank you very much, Cecile. That was truly interesting, and you provided us with, enough information to go on with the conversation. Zakaria, you're with us for the Q&A?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have questions for Zakaria and Cecile? Okay, let me start with a couple of questions. So, participatory action research is a name given to this type of research and process of critical reflection, analysis and collective action by activists and civil society members. How has this approach to research and action changed the ways in which you and your organizations engage with the community and the people you serve? So either Zakaria or Cecile or both.
Sure. Actually, in this point, just to build on what Cecile is saying, that it has to go back to the community, and it has to be something that our community can build on and can take further. So while we don't see that it's a personal, personal role for anyone that does work to continue doing this work for the rest of their lives, but we think it's very important, anything we produce, not only that we take it and go back to the community that we aim to serve and we belong to also, and work with them how this can be improved, how can it be taken further. It is important when we produce any kind of research, for it to be an actual action research, it has to be something that others can build on, other members of the community, and something that doesn't serve you alone as an organization. So if I build something that only me and my organization can take places and to change certain policies that I have on my grants, then I think we're also failing the community somewhere. So I think it's very important, not only that it's consulted constantly in a feedback process with our community, that it's also something that any member of the community can take advantage of and build on and take further.
Thank you, Zakaria.
I personally have to agree to Zakaria. I don't think I have much to add. Maybe it's just so some of the ways in which we changed our Okay, sorry, I was repeating the question. I noted down, I just wanted to look at it again. So the only way that it changed our engagement with the community was, as I was telling you earlier, the way we provide services for our community and the type of services that we provide. It really just mostly feeds into, because our work is mainly focused on service and advocacy rather than purely research, it really feeds within our internal system, and it makes sure that we are really filling gaps that are truly needed and not just acting in a more abstract or
absent way.
Yeah.
Thank you. The second question would be, so action research involves a process of reflection and action about individuals' own experiences with the aim of transforming themselves, the relationship within groups, organizations, and social systems. How has this approach to research helped you engage in this process and rethink or reevaluate strategies you use within your organizations and within the systems that constrain your work?
You want to go first, Cecile? Someone.
Sure. It's a big question. So I think it goes back a bit to the previous question of creating a biofeedback system with our beneficiaries or with our clients for us. So with these type of research and this type of constant conversation with our beneficiaries, we were able to identify different priorities at different times and shift the scope of work accordingly. And sometimes we were able to find that specific methods of service provisions were not working, and so we needed to sort of take a step back, rethink, and then find another way where we can access the largest amount of people with the largest diversity, of course, to ensure that our service were inclusive of everyone and not just, just inclusive on paper or as per advertisement, So yeah, this method of research is important to always keep us in check.
Okay. Any addition to that? Would you like to add anything?
Yes. I think, and we learned this as a little bit of an older trans generation, engaging with a community that is younger than us, which even if we belonged under the same identity, we went in prepared when we're going to meet new members of the community or new people that want to engage with our work, that we have to be willing to shift and change our strategy. If we go into any kind of work, and we always knew that, and we're not willing to shift and change our strategies, then we're only going to be, we'll become Lebanese politicians. We're trying to change people to fit our strategy instead of changing our strategy so we don't lose our people. So I think it's very important to take that into consideration, that when you're doing action research, it's constantly shifting. It's constantly shifting, and someone will come and say, and flip the table and says, and that happened to us in one engagement when we addressed parents, for example. And I think I like giving that example because we never thought of any importance to address parents, for example. But that has to do with a lot of us millennials and our relationship with our parents and what kind of dynamics we have built with them up until people who still live with their parents kind of faced us with that, because the whole point of engaging with your community is not for you to find someone to echo what you're saying, is to find someone to build on what you're saying. So that was a very important engagement that told us, so it's not important for us, but it's important for others. Now, the role becomes, so how do you integrate that into your work to make sure that your work is inclusive with that voice? And also it's important to highlight, being inclusive of voices means giving leadership, means like they need to sit with you on the table. So in the case of Marsa, working with us on I think it's first work that directly targets gender affirming care for trans individuals. The fact that they put us as trans individuals on the leadership of the drafting and what kind of content it will include, that was the most empowering thing. And what's important for this booklet is to continue with this methodology. So if they want to make the second edition, should also center trans individuals to say what's going to go into it. So leadership and strategy have to go together. People who are shifting your strategy need to join you in leadership. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so you're speaking a lot about how it's so important to make sure that the community is really involved. And this kind of goes back to what I was asking before. How do you make sure you reach everyone, like the people in the really far away villages or people in more conservative societies? And kind of a follow-up, how do you And I'm thinking of people who might be put off by like reading things مثلا on your website that might seem too like white or like liberal or far away, like really Western to them. So how can we make this discussion a bit more inclusive or like a bit more culturally sensitive to people who like this is all really new to them and they're just questioning or like they need these services?
Okay, so I'm gonna start with your first question about how do you know you reached everyone? There's no way to know. No, it's a bit idealistic to say that you can reach everyone, but what you can do, and here, مثلا for Marsa, is the importance of partnerships and of existing in different areas without starting from scratch, مثلا. So one of our approaches to ensure that we reach people that are geographically, let's say, outside of Beirut, cannot reach the center here or the services here, is we identify PHCCs or we identify organizations that have the potential to give the services that we do give. We give them training and then we let them, you know, sort of continue the work we do, because they are more aware of the social setting, of the, you know, of the sensitivities of everything in that area, and they are more equipped to be providing services in these areas. So what we try to do is collaborate. It's one of the main pillars of our work, because if we don't collaborate, we will not be able to do everything on our own. So we try to ensure as much inclusivity as we can through collaborating with different organizations, and that organizations that do different types of work, so we can ensure the scope of work is not limited. Your second question was about cultural sensitivity, right? Okay. So that's one very important point in our work, is that we never مثلا prepare a session, let's say educative session, about, let's say, sex ed, and give the same session everywhere and the same methodology. You have to sort of hone in the importance of talking to the community of people who are already working in these areas, understand the needs, understand the barriers, understand the topics that are more or less sensitive, learn the words that are used in this area to talk about specific topics, and sort of is it okay if I spoke in Arabic?
I think everyone understands Arabic.
Yeah, so مهم انك تفهمي انه كيف هون مجتمعات معينه بتتعامل مع هول الامور، وانت تبني الشغل تبعك على هيدا الاساس، مش تجي انت بالطريقه او بالسيستم اللي انت متعود عليه وتجبريهم للاشخاص الثانيين انه يستعملوا نفس السيستم تبعك. يعني بدل ما الكوميونتي تجي لعندك، انت بدك تروحي لعندها، حتى بطريقه التفكير او بطريقه اعطاء المعلومات. و you would be surprised at the few topics that we think we would not be able to open or talk about in specific areas in Lebanon, that you will be able to do it just with a bit of back and forth and with a bit of equating power dynamics to ensure that people from the community to the community are speaking about these things. مش someone يعني انه اذا بتروحي هلا ما بعرف حيلا area بلبنان more conservative انه ايه هو جايين من بيروت يعني ما فيك تجي بapproach بيروت وتروحي فيها على محل تاني where انه it's a completely different context. So مهم انه يكون في هيدا ال back and forth والتعاطي مع اشخاص هن بيشتغلوا بهول المجتمعات وبيعرفوا كيف يخرقوا وكيف يقدروا يوصلوا لهم، وتبني الابروتش تبعك على هيدا الاساس. Zach, I don't know if you want to add anything.
لا بس I want to أكد على اللي Cecile, like not only you can't, why should you reach everyone? And I think it's very important to also be realistic that some people don't need you and some people don't want to come to you, and some people will always prefer to go to a peer or someone they know, or some people prefer to go to a doctor than to come to community members لياخدوا رأيهم or to look at their work. And also, I want to say, like, it really depends on the work that you're doing. So in campaigning, yes, when you do a full research and then you just turn it to a campaign, and then people will come and face you with, what are you campaigning here? And what kind of thought are you bringing into our society? Which I think mainly because we don't do campaigning, we face another problem, is that when we talk to peers where I personally think they have Western thoughts, of what trans is, or they have a perception on transness li kaman. It's being like, it's not so rooted in the local identities and what's going on locally. So I think it's important to recognize that also the work that we're doing, first of all, it's not for everyone. It will not reach everyone. And it doesn't have to live for now. So one of the main things for us in Qorras has always been, how do we create things that is relative today and relative tomorrow? Because if I'm gonna create, and that's what I personally don't like about campaigning. That's what I personally don't like about like these big slogans that come out on banners. They die out the next day when you focus so much on what's happening now. Versus working on content that can be relevant, that's the word, relevant specifically for trans individual in our case, in any time of their journey, and plus produce work to make them feel less alone in the country and less about introducing them into ideas. It was our biggest impact so far has been introducing them to other trans people that are living in the country. And I think in that case, culture plays a very little role, because you're not talking to someone from outside your community. You are still speaking, you're speaking to people that kind of speak your language. That's a very safe space that we hold. Personally, we think it's a priority for us to stick to this space that we hold, instead of venturing into talking to a wider audience. Then we have to like raise awareness to, or engage with their thought and what they think, which can be quite exhausting. So we try to focus more on information that can bring the community closer to us, to each other, makes us stronger and in a power position when we talk about our own issues, when we talk about our own health. So that information really has to become a power tool in our hands, that we know what we're going through in this country. And we know the future that we want to imagine together. Thank you.
Any more questions? Perhaps one final question to conclude the conference. It's a bit personal, so if you don't, you don't have to answer it, but I wanted to ask Zakaria and Cecile, through their work experience and through their community experience, what kind of advice do you give to the LGBTQ+ community in Lebanon on how to approach things? How do they get access to their SRHR? How, just some concluding remarks on the topic. Perhaps some honest, straightforward, heart-to-heart, doesn't have to be academic.
Zach, would you like to start, or should I?
Before saying that, I wanted to say something about the challenges, and specifically because that was one of the questions, and I think I should have got to that. I just want, and this is something that goes for maybe academics, it's an advice. One of the biggest challenges has been in working with our own community, has been the fact that it's right now a sexy thing to do. And this is not, I have my own critique on on AUB, of course, but I have to say this is not a new conversation in AUB. And whether in different institutions, I've been invited for a long time to have different conversations on SRHR. And that's why, to me, it's important to continue build on this relationship, to continue building on this kind of work. Because what academic work gives you is this continuation and the hope that you can build on it for later, and continuation. That's it. Continuation of the work can still happen within academia. And one of the challenges is because it's such a fab right now, it's such a sexy thing to do, everyone is coming on board. And that is bringing forward a big challenge for us in the work that we're doing, that instead of us doing work, most of the time, we're trying to do damage control of bad representation, damage control of representation that is outing, also that damage control to representation that is causing that cultural gap between us and other people. So, and I'll give this example during Pride Month, when the focus was so much on representation, it was so much on the rainbow flag, when people did not have money to eat, when people did not have money to bread. It diverted the conversation from what we need to highlight, that us as a queer community, we are also going through this. We are also suffering under this economical crisis. So instead of focusing our energy to exceptionalize the community from the rest, we need to focus our energy on bringing this community together and saying like, no, we are going through what you're going through, and what you care for is also something we care for, and we all want to live in this country in a safe and dignified manner, which is why I will always encourage conversations on sexual and reproductive health that is inclusive of the LGBT community, and not separating this conversation and make it as an identity separate conversation on its own. So if there's, and from there, if there's any advice I would give people, and this is something I've told a peer activist of mine, where she was telling me that she needs to be nice to all these organizations that are working, because, or else how will they let her into spaces? How will they give her a space to talk? So her method of work was going to be that I will work my way, I will be nice to everyone, and once I'm in a position of power, then I get to say what I think. And my advice to her was, you are that community you're representing. No one has a higher voice than you. You do not have to be nice to everyone. When if people accuse you of being mean, that's because of your frustration. We are a very frustrated community. None of us, we're all underrepresented. We're not included in the conversation. We're completely left out. So of course we have so much frustration. So if there are spaces that is not holding your frustration and not giving it space, then that space is not for you. So it's very important that any space you enter, that it's holding you with your good things and bad things, with your celebratory things about your identity and with your frustrations about your own experience within the context. So don't let anyone or any kind of organizing or any kind of work to put you in a position where you have to be something that is not you, something that does not represent the politics that you hold dear to yourself. So, yes, and thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Zakaria. Do you have to add? Would you like to add something, Cecile?
He said a lot of things that I wanted to say. So.
Okay.
But we already agree on so many things, especially with the issue that LGBT community should not be singled out of the SRHR discourse. It should be integrated. That's a very, very important point. Although they might have different SRHR needs, but this should not come as like just because they have different SRHR needs, they're this, out of this word, population that needs to be studied on its own. No, it needs to be understood within the discourse that's already present. And yeah, also something about the barriers, I think. Also, there's a lot, in particular in research, there's a lot of gatekeeping as to who could do research, right? A certain credibility should be there, when in fact, anyone can do research. Really, anyone can do research. You don't have to have like this university degree that could allow you to do it. It's something that communities can learn to do on their own and learn to use as a tool for them to better their quality of life, if we want to call it that. So yeah, gatekeeping is a big issue, as is funding. The problem with trying to instate these type of research methods or these type of approaches is that you have to follow international guidelines, right? You have to follow the trend that Zakaria was talking about. Right now, this is the sexy thing to study. Let's do it. Let's study it. How? Well, we have a few indicators in mind that we think we would like to work. So this really blocks your ability to create a conversation, the community members, and produce something that's that's more integrative of the community itself. And I think it's something we should reflect on, how that's being reflected on by, for example, feminist donors who would allow a bit more flexibility in research methods and a bit more understanding of different ways of research that are not per se empirical. And honestly, not all research has to be empirical. It could, use different approaches. Advice-wise, I think Zakaria said it all. I think the only thing I would add is that there is a lot of strength in the community, and we don't need organizations as much as we think we do. We don't need them. It's good, important to understand the power we hold that could influence these organizations. Because at the end of the day, certain organizations exist to serve certain populations or certain communities, and that's what they should do. And communities can hold them accountable. There's a lot of power there that sometimes بين أكتر إنه oh yeah, I need the NGO. Well, not really. You need each other to keep going. You need, these services, أكيد you need them, and it's good that they are present, but كمان it's good that they serve you in the right way or in the way that you would want them to serve you. Because at the end of the day, we need to start somewhere, right? Accountability needs to start somewhere. And some organizations are willing to listen. And it's important to have this conversation with them.
We keep pushing until we get.
We keep pushing, exactly.
All right. So with that, thank you so much, Zakaria. Thank you so much, Cecile.
Thank you for having us.
On behalf of Asfari, I conclude today's conference. Thank you so much for those who attended the conference.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.